The spotlight hit him like a freight train, 20,000 voices screaming his name, the heat from the pyrotechnics making the air shimmer, and Paul Daniel Frehley, Space Ace, standing at the center of Madison Square Garden stage, his silver Les Paul hanging from his shoulders. May 1977. Kiss was at the absolute zenith of their power, selling out arenas across America. The Love Gun Tour had transformed them from rock stars into cultural phenomena, their faces on lunchboxes and comic books. But in the middle of Shock Me, the song Ace himself had written and sang, his moment to shine without the shadow of Gene Simmons or Paul Stanley, something happened that nobody would ever forget. Ace Frehley stopped playing. His fingers, dancing across the fretboard with precision, simply froze. The backing track continued for a heartbeat before the band realized their lead guitarist had gone still. And then, under the hot white spotlights that turned the silver makeup on his face into liquid mercury, those in the front rows saw something impossible. Space Ace, the cool and mysterious alien, the untouchable guitar hero, had tears streaming down his cheeks. The makeup couldn't hide it. Something in that crowd had broken through every defense mechanism Paul Daniel Frehley had spent years constructing. Before we continue with what Ace saw that night and why it shattered him completely, subscribe to this channel for untold stories and moments that changed rock history. Now let's go back to that night, because what happened next revealed something about Ace Frehley that even his closest bandmates didn't fully understand. To understand that moment, you need to know what Shock Me meant to Ace. This wasn't just another Kiss song. It was personal, born from genuine trauma. In late 1976, during a show in Lakeland, Florida, Ace touched poorly grounded metal equipment while his guitar was plugged in. The electrical shock threw him backward, his heart racing, muscles seizing, the smell of burnt flesh mixing with smoke. For terrifying seconds, he thought he would die on stage. But instead of fear, Ace transformed that pain into music. Shock Me became his anthem about survival, about taking the worst thing and turning it into power. When he was chosen to sing lead vocals, it was validation. Space Ace wasn't just the cool guitarist anymore. He was the main character of his own story. The Madison Square Garden shows in May 1977 were significant. This was home territory, New York City, where all four members grew up, where they paid dues in dive bars before the makeup and millions. Playing the Garden was a homecoming, proof that four working-class guys could conquer the world. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric but tense. Gene Simmons checked the set list obsessively. Paul Stanley warmed up his voice. Peter Criss joked with the crew. And Ace sat alone, his Gibson Les Paul in his lap, not playing, just holding it. This was how he prepared. Silence, space, a moment to center himself before the chaos. But something was different that night. Crew members who had worked with Kiss for years noticed immediately. Ace's hands were shaking slightly as he applied his silver makeup. When asked if he was okay, he just nodded and turned away. The show started exactly as planned. Opening pyrotechnics, the descent through smoke, the first chords of I Stole Your Love. 20,000 voices became one roar. Kiss fed off that energy. Gene breathing fire, Paul soaring across the crowd, Peter's drum riser elevated to the rafters, and Ace delivered solo after solo with effortless cool. His style wasn't about speed or showmanship. It was about feel, finding the perfect note and letting it hang like smoke. When Shock Me came 2/3 through the show, the stage transformed. Blue and silver lights created an otherworldly atmosphere. Ace stepped to the microphone, and the crowd went deafening. This was his moment. The Chaho intro kicked in, that distinctive riff every guitarist had tried to learn. Ace's vocals came through raw and honest, completely different from Gene's theatrical growl or Paul's polished delivery. Then came the solo. For the first minute, everything was perfect. Ace's fingers moved with practiced precision, each note ringing clear through the wall of Marshall amplifiers. The spotlight followed him across the stage, his silver costume catching light, his Les Paul slung low. The crowd was transfixed, but 90 seconds in, during a brief pause where the rhythm dropped out, something changed. He stopped moving. His body went rigid. His left hand froze at the 12th fret. His right hand, holding the pick, dropped to his side. The backing track continued for maybe 3 seconds before the band realized. Gene and Paul exchanged glances. Peter stopped drumming. The entire stadium held its breath, and that's when people in front rows saw it. Under the stage lights, cutting through the silver makeup, tears were streaming down his face, not moisture from heat, actual tears running down his cheeks, dripping off his chin, leaving dark trails through the silver paint. The question everyone was asking, the question that would dominate backstage conversations for decades. What did Ace Frehley see in that crowd? From the stage, 20,000 people appeared as a mass, a sea of faces. The front rows were illuminated, but beyond that, darkness. But Ace had been scanning the crowd during his solo, something he always did, to connect, to remind himself he was performing for real people. And in the third row, slightly left of center, directly in his line of sight, there was a young girl. Maybe 14 or 15, small and thin, wearing a homemade Kiss t-shirt. But it wasn't her appearance that stopped Ace. It was the sign she was holding, handwritten on cardboard, letters large and uneven but painfully sincere. Ace, you saved my life. Thank you for teaching me guitars are louder than pain. The moment Ace read those words, something inside him shattered. He knew exactly what she meant. He knew about pain that couldn't be spoken, the kind that lived in your chest and made every breath feel like work. He knew about using music as a lifeline, about how a guitar solo could be the only thing standing between you and despair. He knew because he had been that kid once, growing up in the Bronx, feeling like an outsider, finding salvation in 6 strings. And here was this girl, telling him he had done for her what his heroes had done for him. The weight of that responsibility, the knowledge that his pain transformed into art, had reached someone who needed it most, was overwhelming. For years, he had hidden behind Space Ace, used the makeup and costume to keep the world at arm's length. But in that moment, Paul Daniel Frehley couldn't hide. The pause lasted maybe 10 seconds in reality, but felt like an eternity. Gene Simmons, always quick to adapt, made a split-second decision. He walked over to Ace, put a hand on his shoulder, and leaned into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the music moves us in ways we can't explain. That's the power of rock and roll. Classic Gene, turning a potentially awkward moment into part of the show, giving Ace cover. Paul Stanley strummed his guitar, encouraging applause. The noise gave Ace seconds to wipe his face, take a breath, bury Paul Daniel Frehley back under the silver makeup. When he returned to the microphone and finished the solo, the emotion was still there, but channeled into the music where he could handle it. The notes that poured out for the remainder of Shock Me had a rawness, a vulnerability, that made it one of the greatest performances of his career. People who saw hundreds of concerts said it was the most honest moment they ever witnessed on stage. But the story didn't end when the song finished. What happened backstage revealed even more about who Ace Frehley really was beneath the persona. After the final encore, after the explosions and theatrics, the band retreated to their dressing room. Post-show chaos began, crew breaking down equipment, managers discussing the next city, groupies trying to gain access. But Ace immediately asked security to find the girl with the sign. He described her exactly. Third row, left of center, small, thin, homemade Kiss shirt. Within 15 minutes, security located her. She was outside with her mother, both stunned they were being escorted backstage. When she walked into the dressing room, still clutching that cardboard sign, Ace was sitting alone, makeup half removed, silver paint still clinging to his hairline. The contrast between the alien and the tired man underneath was stark. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then Ace stood up and did something unexpected. He hugged her. Not a photo-op hug, but a real embrace that lasted long enough to be uncomfortable for everyone else, but felt necessary for both of them. "You wrote that sign," Ace said, voice hoarse. It wasn't a question. The girl nodded, unable to speak. "Did you mean it?" She nodded again, now crying. "Then I need to tell you something," Ace continued, kneeling to her eye level. "You're going to be okay. I don't know what you're going through, what makes the pain so loud you need guitars to drown it out. But I know it feels like it's never going to end. I know it feels like nobody understands. And I'm telling you, that's not true. You're going to survive this, and on the other side, you'll be stronger than you can imagine right now." He reached behind him, picked up his silver Les Paul, the same guitar from Shock Me, and held it out to her. "This is yours now. Learn to play it. When the pain gets too loud, make it even louder. Turn it into music. Do what I did." The room went silent. This wasn't about publicity or image. This was Ace recognizing himself in another broken person and offering the same lifeline that saved him. The girl took the guitar with trembling hands. Her mother whispered, "Thank you," repeatedly. But Ace spent the next 20 minutes talking to this teenager about guitar techniques, amp settings, the importance of learning blues scales before attempting complex solos. He demonstrated finger positions, explained how to get that distinctive Kiss sound from a Marshall amplifier, shared stories about his own early struggles learning in his Bronx bedroom. He wrote down guitar teachers in her area, gave her management contact with instructions to reach out if she needed help. He treated her like a fellow musician, a member of the same tribe that communicated through distortion and power chords. She came as a fan, clutching a homemade sign and desperate hope. She left as a guitarist, holding a piece of rock history. The incident became legend in Kiss circles, but for decades few knew the full story. Ace rarely spoke about it in interviews, deflecting questions with characteristic shyness and reluctance to claim credit for anything emotional. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, who witnessed the aftermath firsthand, developed new understanding of their bandmate that night. They had always known Ace was talented, that his guitar playing was essential to the Kiss sound, but they hadn't fully appreciated the depth of emotion he carried. In later years, when pressures of fame and demons of addiction began tearing Kiss apart from the inside, when Ace's drinking became a serious problem and his reliability questionable, Gene and Paul would sometimes remember that night at Madison Square Garden. They would remember the tears streaming down his face, the way he connected with that girl, the genuine compassion beneath all the dysfunction and self-destructive behavior. It didn't excuse the professional problems, didn't make the challenges any easier to manage, but it provided crucial context. Ace Frehley felt things deeply, perhaps too deeply for the machine that Kiss had become. The same sensitivity that made him stop mid-solo and cry on stage also made him reach for a bottle to numb the constant emotional bombardment. The same empathy that drove him to give away his own guitar made it impossible to maintain the emotional armor successful rock stars needed to survive in the spotlight. He was built differently, wired for genuine connection in an industry that often rewarded calculated distance. The girl with the sign, whose name was never publicly revealed, respecting the privacy both she and Ace wanted to maintain, did learn to play that silver Les Paul. She practiced every day, her fingers developing calluses, her technique improving, her confidence growing. Years later, after Ace had left Kiss and was struggling through his own battles with sobriety and self-destruction, battling the same demons he had once helped her escape, she reached out through the contact information he had given her. She was in college now, playing in a band, pursuing music seriously, thanks to that one transformative night at Madison Square Garden. She wanted Ace to know that his gift, both the physical guitar and the emotional support, had literally changed the trajectory of her life. The pain that had been so loud, so overwhelming that she needed guitars to drown it out, hadn't disappeared completely. But she had learned to transform it, channel it into something creative and powerful, exactly as Ace had taught her. When Ace received that message, in the middle of one of the darkest periods of his life, when his own future seemed uncertain and his connection to music felt tenuous, it became his lifeline in return. The idea that his moment of vulnerability, his tears on that stage, had created something positive in the world, gave him a reason to keep fighting. It reminded him that Space Ace was just a character, a role he played for the crowds, but Paul Daniel Frehley was a real person who could make a real difference in real lives. The Madison Square Garden incident also had a profound effect on how Ace approached his performances going forward. After that night, he paid more attention to the crowd, really looked at the faces in the front rows, read the signs that fans held up, made eye contact when he could. He began to understand that his role wasn't just to play guitar well or hit the right notes or execute the planned stage moves with precision. His role was to be present, to create moments of genuine connection in the middle of the spectacle and smoke machines and theatrical chaos that defined Kiss. Other band members noticed the change. Peter Criss, who had his own complicated relationship with fame and its pressures, mentioned in a later interview that Ace seemed more focused after that tour, more intentional about the emotional content of his performances. Even as the personal relationships within Kiss deteriorated over the following years, even as business pressures and creative differences began to tear the band apart, Ace's connection to the music and the audience remained strong and authentic. The legacy of that night extends beyond one girl, one guitar, one interrupted solo. It represents what music can do, the responsibility artists have to their audiences, and the courage it takes to be vulnerable before 20,000 people. In decades since that May night in 1977, Madison Square Garden has hosted thousands of concerts. But for those there, who witnessed Ace Frehley stop mid-solo with tears streaming down his face, that moment remains singular. A reminder that beneath makeup and corporate machinery, rock and roll is about human connection. It's about one person reaching through sound and finding another who needs exactly that message at exactly that moment. Ace Frehley, for all his struggles and complicated dynamics that led to his departure from Kiss, understood that truth better than most. His tears weren't weakness. They were proof music still mattered, that it could still move him the way it moved his audience, that he hadn't lost the core of what made him pick up a guitar. Today, that silver Les Paul exists somewhere, probably battered and worn from decades of use. Somewhere, a woman who was once a desperate teenager holds that guitar and remembers the night Space Ace became real. And somewhere, Ace Frehley carries the memory of those 10 seconds when the mask slipped and the world saw Paul Daniel Frehley as he truly was. Vulnerable, compassionate, profoundly moved by the connection he created. That's the real story of Madison Square Garden. Not just that Ace cried, but why, what happened because he cried, and what it revealed about the man behind the makeup. Guitars really are louder than pain, but sometimes the most powerful sound is silence. The silence of a solo interrupted, the silence of 20,000 people holding their breath, the silence of understanding that passes between two people who recognize the same darkness and choose to fight it together.